welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I am, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 99th episode, our returning guest is Sarah Kendzior. You first heard Sarah Kendzior on episodes 70, 80, and 89. Sarah Kendzior is, well, you know who Sarah Kendzior is by now, don't you? She is a St. Louis-based journalist and expert on authoritarian states. One quick programming note before we begin. At 2:58 p.m. Tuesday, the New York Times announced the latest addition to their editorial board, Quinn Norton. Sarah and I started recording this episode at about 8 p.m. At 10:18 p.m., the following was posted to the New York Times Communications Twitter page, where Quinn's hiring had been first announced just hours before. The following is attributable to James Bennett, editorial page editor, the New York Times. Despite our review of Quinn Norton's work and our conversations with her previous employers, this was new information to us. Based on that, we've decided to go our separate ways. And now on to the show. Hello?
Hello?
Hey, Sarah.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for calling, and thanks for making time for me tonight.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, sorry, I called twice, and some guy named Jason answered both times. I swear I dialed it right.
On my number?
Yeah, I swear I dialed the number right. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if your text came through, then I don't know why a phone call wouldn't. That kind of freaks me out. I've had weird shit going on with my phone.
Yeah. Anyway, par for the course. So, So I'm glad to have you back on. I want to try something new. I feel like we've gone so many depressing routes in our previous conversation. I'm sure we'll get there eventually, but I want to start with some good news. Of course, the Women's March came back for a second year. It was bigger than the first time. That made me feel good, even though it didn't get the coverage of the first necessarily. But also another thing I thought was good news is I saw that Pennsylvania has switched to paper ballots, or at least has a paper backup for their going into 2018 elections this year, and I feel like that's so important, and I feel like people just need to demand that everywhere. I don't see why that's not in all 50 states. So
yeah, no, those are definitely two good things. I'm glad you brought them up because I'm looking at the rest of the news like holy shit. But yeah, the Women's March was great. I'm not sure it was bigger than the first time, but I know that those two were still, I think, the biggest marches basically in U.S. history, and certainly in recent U.S. history. It's a shame it didn't get more coverage, but I think that shows that there's a lot of activism going on the ground in a grassroots way, in a way that's not necessarily covered or seen, but we see the effect of it, of course, in the polls. We saw it in the elections in Virginia and in Alabama, and I think that that's just a more outward indicator of something already there. And yeah, with Pennsylvania, I mean, we've had kind of a lot of mixed news about voting and the fairness of voting. We had many admissions recently from the administration that Russia is going to interfere and they're not planning to do anything about it. But on the other hand, we do have these moves against gerrymandering and for paper ballots and for more transparency and unhackable voting process. And yeah, absolutely, they should be doing paper ballots in every state, especially given that they've admitted that, Russia is planning to interfere in our election, which I don't just take as Russia's going to make some propaganda. I think that, given their track record of hacking, I'm sure we should be prepared for, a hack of the voter rolls, for example. So yeah, hopefully they'll, states will at least maybe take the power into their own hands, because on a federal level, I don't have high expectations.
No, absolutely not. And there's no reason for Trump to address that, because it wouldn't be to help other than him, in this case at least. I don't know why the Republican Party is so sanguine about it, though, because I feel like they're playing a very dangerous game where this benefits them now, but it doesn't mean it will always benefit to them in the future if they keep this up. So yeah, I mean, that's what I've been saying all along, that this is short-term thinking. Initially I really thought the Republicans that were going along with Trump were driven more by careerism and opportunism, which is obviously a short-term gain when you're turning into a kleptocracy, where the majority of wealth is held by this tiny elite that has to show
show constant fealty to the ruler, which is basically the direction that we're headed. Like, that doesn't work out well for your average Republican. I'm not sure that they're completely aware of that. They are still acting afraid. I was kind of hoping that just analyzing the gains and losses of the situation would push them in the right direction, but I still have the sense that something else is kind of holding them back, the ones who may want to break free of the Trump spell and, move against him. I think they still feel constrained.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you brought up something a couple weeks ago that I'm definitely glad that you alluded to there with Lindsey Graham, for example, who, I was never the hugest fan of, but he was showing some signs of showing some backbone and a little bit of sparks of some kind of recognition that this is a problem. And then it seems like he went golfing with Trump, and that just all evaporated, and he's just the most sycophantic lickspittle this side of Mike Pence. So it's like, you theorized, and probably not too, out there, that he maybe somebody, they did hack his email, right? I mean, his email was hacked like everyone else's.
Oh, that's not even a theory. Like, Lindsey Graham said so. Like, right. He came out right after the election and said his email had been hacked, like his individual email, and the RNC email. And so, I do think it's possible that plays a role in some of the behavior that we're seeing from Republicans. But I also think, in addition to the possibility of blackmail, there's also just the simple matter of threats, and the fact that Trump and his backers for his entire career have spent their lives threatening people until they get what they want. These are very mafia-style tactics. Sometimes people bring up Putin and Russia and say, this is in the vein of Putin, which, of course, is true, but I don't think that Trump needed inspiration, because that's just how he operated on his own, going back to the days with Roy Cohn. So I think that that's possibly something that's happening with Graham and other Republicans. Oftentimes when a person can't get what they want with an individual, they go after their loved ones, they go after their families. I've wondered if that's going on. And there's also some financial improprieties with the GOP and their money. We have the Steve Wynn situation, which is its own thing. They've got shady donors, and they also have shady foreign donors. They have a number of oligarchs who are giving campaign contributions in fairly large amounts, and one of the recipients of that contribution is Lindsey Graham. So that's another possibility. But it is very disappointing. He and McCain were the two who kind of inaugurated the Russia interference investigation, basically even before Democrats did, at least in terms of what people did after the election beforehand. I think Harry Reid was the most vocal. McCain is relatively quiet, and Graham has done such a conspicuous 180 that, it seems almost symbolic. I mean, he literally just reverses his words. He's like, Trump is a kook, and then, some people are saying that Trump is a kook, and that's crazy. Like, it's if he wants you to notice. I'm not sure I want to give him that much credit, but it is, it's interesting and it's alarming to watch.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, for sure. And then it seems like the only people that are speaking out, like Jeff Flake, for example, they're not, they're retiring, they're leaving the fight. These are the people that, are showing some kind of at least rhetorical backbone, but they aren't sticking around at all. So it's like the people that are going to be there, I don't see much in the way of resistance from inside of Trump's party. It seems like he's basically remade them into his own image, basically.
Yeah, I think that's what's happened, and you're seeing a record number of Republicans stepping down, which again I think ties into fear. I think that some Republicans are very worried about what they've got caught up in. Maybe they thought they'd be getting some kind of benefit out of this situation, and then realize they're in over their heads and are just trying to extract themselves from it. I think that might be the case with Paul Ryan or Jason Chavez, and maybe with Flake, although at least he's speaking out in some kind of fashion. But yeah, it doesn't have like a lot of, teeth behind it when you know that person's not going to be there to actually stand up to Trump to his face, to actually represent you. And so, it's a bad situation. He has remade the party in his image. They have capitulated to him. I would think it's humiliating for them, because he insults not just them, but, wives and families and careers. And, what an embarrassing person to have to worship, like there's no redeeming qualities. It's not like he's some great, charismatic, brilliant leader. I mean, he's just this absolute, D-list loser, and they all have to bow down to him. But that, again, I think speaks to the culture of fear that the Republicans seem to be living in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we saw that, you know, with the Alabama Senate race when, you know, I just saw the Republicans give up every, you know, family values, quote unquote, tenet that they ever said that they had just to, you know, throw their weight behind this basically child molester. And, you know, somebody that, you know, I think if he had a D next to his name, they would excoriate through and through. At least that's what I was always told, you know, growing up, that, you know, we don't, oh, you know, what about the children? What do we tell the children? It's like, I don't know. Sometimes you got to date a kid, right? So, I mean.
Yeah. No, that was frightening. I mean, these sort of shifts we're seeing, you know, where just things that were just, I think, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, just so off the radar in terms of being part of mainstream opinion that you wouldn't have even worried about it happening. Like, you know, we're celebrating child molesters running for Senate, or, you know, we have Nazis getting puff pieces written about them in the New York Times. Like, that was not like a future that people envisioned. And I think that, you know, in part because of the internet, because I think that sort of pushed the boundaries of, you know, regular discourse and civility and whatnot. Of course, you're going to see an increase in extremist sentiment, and we saw that for the last few years. But what we're seeing now is these kind of establishment brands being really willing to, you know, hook up with the most just disgusting and, you know, destructive opinions, you know, with Nazis, with pedophiles, child molesters. They're willing to, like, hitch their brand to that wagon. And that's really disturbing to me, because that to me says they don't think there'll be consequences from their audience. And it's weird, because I really think there are consequences. I mean, you know, there's a reason Roy Moore is not in the Senate and Doug Jones is. There's a real consequence to that. That was not what people in Alabama wanted. And, you know, you also see the kind of pushback when papers like the Times are promoting Nazis. You see people saying, no, I don't want Nazis. Like, I'm against them. Like, I would say the majority of Americans, as bad as things are right now, are still against actual Nazis. But that stuff, it just keeps getting pushed down our throats. And that's weird to me. I kind of wonder, you know, what's behind it? Like, who's driving these stories and this sort of way of portraying really inhumane and horrible things as if they're everyday normal occurrences.
Right. And right next door in Illinois, we have a literal Nazi running under the Republican ticket in, you know, was it a House race or something coming this year?
Yeah, exactly. Like, people, you know, that's another consequence of this, is that they feel emboldened. You know, last week I was at University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and Matthew Heimbach, who's an actual Nazi, like a National Socialist, he calls himself that, doesn't hold back. He is coming there. He arranged to be there under fake pretenses. He impersonated a local church in order to reserve space, and you know, the university is not standing up to him effectively. You know, they're condemning him. They're writing these sort of, you know, wishy-washy, racism is wrong, but, you know, the answer to free speech is more speech. And meanwhile, you know, students are terrified. They're terrified of Charlottesville because someone actually died. And when, you know, the Nazis come, it's like people don't seem to grasp there's a difference here. This isn't just somebody whose speech you don't like. You know, this is someone who might actually kill you if you're not white, or if you're not Christian, or if you don't fit into their world. These are people who promote ethnic genocide and will take the opportunity to carry it out. And so I think there's just such an enormous difference. And I don't know if people just don't want to accept what's right in front of them, even when it's plainly stated, because it's just so horrific, and then you're forced to confront it, or what. But, you know, I'm hoping that the chancellor at Knoxville is a little more stalwart and just says, hey, no, like, you can't come. You tried to come here under a lie anyway, so, you know, they got a great excuse to kick him out right there. And just draw the line, you know, just draw a firm line. They can talk on the internet, they can talk somewhere else, they don't need to talk at every school.
Sure. And, you know, I believe in the, you know, free speech and First Amendment as much as anybody, but, you know, the difference here is that when Nazis and fascists get into power, they close all the doors behind them, and there's no more free speech for anybody if they get their way. anyway. So I think that's a little bit of a difference from them and any other group that you want to hear them out, you know. So I think there is a difference.
And that's the thing, is like people act like they're this poor, beleaguered minority. It's like they're supported by the government. You know, that's pretty unusual. Like that's really never happened, where we've had a president witness a Nazi rally and be like, yeah, you know, both sides. And, you know, of course, there's people like Stephen Miller, you know, in the administration. Bannon was previously, and they're Nazi sympathizers. So they have the backing of the state behind them. And they have, you know, ICE is completely out of control in terms of deportations and harassment of immigrants. They have people that are able to carry out these very Nazi-esque, you know, policies in practice. So that kind of speech has, you know, much more vigor to it than it would under any administration, whether Obama or Bush. Like, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. Like, we're in new terrain, and I wish that people understood that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you kind of alluded to this with what you were saying before, but you know, the New York Times is at it again. You know, I don't know what, I mean, we talked about the Nazi Next Door profile last time, of course, but you know, it seems like the opinion section is kind of gone off the rails in the last couple of weeks here. I mean, we got this Barry Weiss person who I wasn't familiar with before saying, you know, what was she saying about the California born?
That she's an immigrant because she's not white. And then, you know, she tried to kind of walk that one back a little bit, or just say that it meant something different than what she wrote. You know, and I was thinking, you know, that's pretty bad, but honestly, compared to them hiring Quinn Norton,
yeah, this is another thing that's developed in the last few hours that I wasn't aware of this person. I'm just getting to know them, but oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, she's, you know, a proud friend of Nazis, a supporter of white nationalism. And, you know, like, I got a lot of shit a couple of weeks ago because the New York Times had written an article praising Stephen Miller, and they published it on Holocaust Memorial Day. Oof. And a lot of people were very upset about that because, you know, it's very pointed. And a friend of mine who is descended, you know, from family, you know, she had family who was killed in the Holocaust, was upset, and she tweeted about it and was basically like, you know, fuck the New York Times. And I wrote back and I said I agreed, and I said, you know, they're putting out a white supremacist ideology. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in the paper shares it, but you've got, you know, Nazi puff pieces, and, you know, I named a few other examples. You know, at one point they were selling swastikas through an article. Like, they're doing things that are really unusual for a paper to do at all, but especially a paper of that stature. And I was rewarded with, like, just, you know, a flurry of hit pieces, none of whom quoted anything I'd ever said about the issue in depth. You know, I've written about this. I've given long interviews to people like you about this. They just took the one tweet. I never said that the New York Times was staffed by Nazis or had a Nazi agenda. I said it had a white supremacist agenda because, you know, it does. And then, of course, today, they actually are going with a, you know, open Nazi sympathizer as an op-ed columnist. And so now my inbox is just full of apology emails and like, wow, you know, I thought you were, like, you know, off the rails or whatever, but unfortunately you were right. And I'm just, you know, I kind of figured, because it's like the New York Times has been going this direction for a long time. So I didn't bother to respond to the pieces out there. I'm like, you know, I hope I'm wrong. It would be great if they change what they're doing, if they go in a different direction. Then, you know, I'll just be wrong, and that's fine. I didn't think I was wrong. I thought they were going to get progressively worse, and they did. They're being much more open about it, you know. And as for why they're doing that, why they would want to hire somebody who associates with Nazis and, you know, with basically excuses, you know, these really hateful ideologies and, you know, ways of viewing other people. I don't know why they would want to do that. You know, it baffles me as much as it baffles other people. The only consistency to what they do is that it protects Trump, whether it's lying about the Russia investigation, whether it's about mainstreaming white supremacy, whether it's about downplaying sexual assault, you know, making it seem as if the victims of sexual assault are some kind of wild mob that's not letting any man just, you know, hold the door open for you or something. You know, they're trying to restructure everything so that it basically gets Trump off the hook because he is a white supremacist. He is a sexual assaulter, and he's involved, obviously, in the Russia scandal. And so when you combine everything they're doing, there does seem to be some kind of objective, or, you know, but it's why they would want to do that is really strange, especially because they do still have some good people there. You know, like Charles Blow is very good. Some of their investigative reporters, especially on environmental issues, are very good. Like, I don't know what those folks are, how they live with this, like what they make of it, because they're not allowed to speak about it. That's part of their contract. They're basically forbidden from critiquing the paper. There's no public editor, so we don't get feedback in that respect. And the whole situation is extremely strange.
Well, and yeah, you know, I expect more of them because you know, I respect the New York Times. Like you said, they have good journalists. They've done stories I've been, you know, that have been praiseworthy. I think they've done good things in their history. But then when I see something like you mentioned, you know, the Me Too movement, and, you know, then we have Brett Stevens swooping in to defend the honor of Woody Allen, and it's like, I don't know what we're playing at here, you know? Like,
yeah, well, exactly. Like, why would you want to defend, you know, the worst people, the cruelest people, you know, and that rhetoric has consequences. Like, it's crazy. There's like this clip of me that went viral on the internet where I was basically telling off a Breitbart editor at a conference in Denmark about how, you know, it's not just words. Like, you know, hate crimes rise as a result of this. Like, people get hurt as a result of this. Kids get bullied. And I could say all those same things, unfortunately, to the New York Times that I said to Breitbart in the past, because they're really, you know, going in that direction. And, you know, of course, it's not universal. It's not every article, but it's enough. It's enough that, you know, people notice it and they're wondering what the hell happened here. Like, why would you do this? And I don't get it. I'd love to hear from somebody there, you know, who does still seem to have a conscience, to see how they would explain this and how they feel about it. I'm curious, but I have a feeling they can't speak out. So.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean, I can't imagine that you were surprised. You would be surprised if this was Breitbart, but this isn't Breitbart. At least I thought it wasn't. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't expect you to act this way. You know, or
I mean,
yeah,
they've always had issues. You know, they had their issues with the war in Iraq and the run-up to Judith Miller. So they've had issues with truth. They certainly had issues with racism. I mean, I'll never forget on the day of Michael Brown's funeral, you know, waking up to that article saying he was no angel and just thinking about his parents and hoping that they didn't see that. But, you know, that, unfortunately, it doesn't excuse it, but that's pretty typical in American life. Like, that's something you see a lot. That's just ingrained structural racism, you know, especially towards young black men, that you see all the time. But something like defending a pedophile or defending a Nazi, you know, again, like, we have more examples. We have, you know, Woody Allen to add to Roy Moore and, you know, another Nazi to add to the Times roster today. That's new. It's like you're trying to find the absolute worst elements of humanity and make them seem not so bad. And the only, you know, sort of pragmatic reason I could see from kind of a propaganda angle is that you have one of the worst Americans to get involved in politics and history currently occupying the White House, and an awful lot of terrible other people in that White House, and maybe you want to make them not seem so bad either. You need to shift the whole political culture in a different direction for any of this to seem normal and acceptable. But I don't know. I don't know whether they'll really achieve that, because I do think people just have common sense. And, you know, I live in a racist state, but they're still not really down with the Nazis. You know, they're not like wanting to put swastikas on, and they're less tolerant of Nazis than the New York Times. So that's an interesting phenomenon.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, you know, speaking of the Me Too movement, we had the whole Rob Porter scandal that continues to rage on, and what was the speechwriter that also resigned in the same week there for the similar domestic abuse situation, and you know, we had Christopher Wray from the FBI basically blowing up the White House's timeline of events. I just feel like the White House and everyone else is kind of bending over backwards to try to defend this or try to cover it up. You know, how was he allowed anywhere in these like state secrets when he couldn't pass a background check is what I'm wondering. So
yeah, no, I just wrote an op-ed about that today. It's not out yet, but hopefully it'll be out in the next few days, about that very issue. Like, how did he, pass a background check? They were about to promote him. He didn't even have a background check for the job he held. He couldn't even pass that, and they were going to give him even more responsibility and even more access to classified info. And I think this is a huge danger. It's a danger with him. It's a danger with Kushner. It's a danger with Trump. You see a lot of people who are, immoral and unethical, who have shady pasts, which makes them susceptible to blackmail, and who don't seem to have any particular loyalty to this country, or, certainly not a desire to serve it. And what I've been kind of wondering, because this is like a revolving door White House, I think they have a turnover rate of about 34%, like much, much higher than a typical administration. What are all these people doing with all the state secrets and information that they picked up on the job? Because they don't honor the typical norms of governance. They don't honor it when they're inside. For me to imagine that they come out and are honoring it outside when there's this rich market in state secrets, and you have organizations like WikiLeaks, or other, anti-U.S. or, non-state actors or even state actors that will pay for this kind of information. I wonder what they're all up to. I mean, we know that what Manafort does, what he's done his whole life is to go and, peddle this kind of information to different people, and he did that while he was on the Trump campaign. He was offering his services in 2016 while on Trump's staff to Oleg Deripaska, because he was able to get more information because he was part of that campaign and, in the center of it all. And so I'm imagining, like, what's Michael Flynn been doing? What's Michael Flynn Jr. been doing? Like, what have all these, Bannon and Gorka and all these other terrible people been doing? And who have they been talking to? And so I kind of envision, a broader national security crisis down the road, because all these different actors will, are possibly engaging with people who are against our country. And we don't have a national security establishment that can really fight it, because Trump himself is against having that. He's against the intelligence community. He's against any kind of strong defense. And so that's alarming. I don't know how that will exactly play out, because, it's a new problem, and also the whole digital element of it, I think, makes it different than anything before as well.
Right. And well, I mean, Bannon was on the National Security Council for a time. I mean, and this is why I think you probably mentioned this before, but, this is why people in these types of situations put their family members like Kushner in places of power. It's not because they're particularly, competent or good at any kind of job you're going to give them. It's that, they'll be loyal if push comes to shove, that they'll circle the wagons when need be. And, that's how it works in these kind of situations. It's how you keep it together. You don't let outsiders in. So,
and that's a huge thing for Trump, is that loyalty oath. And that was true when he was a private citizen, when he was a quote businessman as well. But it's like a mafia style loyalty oath. It's omerta basically, and intimidation. And that's absolutely why he installed his family. That was one of the first things he did that got me really worried. I mean, I was very worried just in general, but I was kind of hoping like maybe he would hold back from the like sort of playbook dictator rules, but like installing your children in the administration, especially when you are notorious for running, money laundering schemes and whatnot, is just such a like, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan kind of, move. And he did, and that is why they're there. Like they don't actually have jobs. They're just there as backup, and I think to help kind of, move certain processes along. They have their own international relationships with different countries and with their own businesses, with the Trump brand, with, Kushner's real estate holdings and money problems. I think they're trying to work out privately a whole bunch of things, but I mean, it's frightening. It's basically a mafia family who are using, the executive branch as an ATM. And, that's obviously not good. I don't know how long that's going to last. I wish Mueller would hurry up. But I've been saying that for years, so I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, I'm at least glad that people are starting to wise up to the fact that Ivanka isn't going to save us, and she was never the mitigating voice of reason or whatever people tried to say she was at the beginning. People don't even. I haven't seen many think pieces lately about her swooping in to save the day. So I think maybe people have gotten it through their heads that, she's not really the, the savior we all, or not we all, I never thought, but, some people thought she was.
Yeah, it's amazing that people thought that, because there's just no reason to. I think, I guess to some extent, like, she can't help being the daughter of Donald Trump. So, maybe people were cutting her slack, like, oh, she's just doing what her dad wants her now. But still, it's like, people treat them like they're children. They're my age. They're in their 30s. Like, they're adults. They can make decisions. They can decide whether they want to participate in a criminal enterprise or a kleptocracy, and they should pay the consequences for when they make that kind of decision. I'm also seeing, finally, that people are understanding, John Kelly is not a force for good. Like, he may have fought honorably in the military, but, he's xenophobic, he's racist, he protects very bad employees, he, attacks other, service people, and generally is, doing Trump's bidding. He's really not that different from a typical Republican. I think there's a lot of false hope placed on him that somehow he was there to, like, keep Trump in line and, keep things working. But, he's just as bad in his own way. He's kind of like Pence. He's got his own issues and they overlap with Trump a lot. And, it doesn't really leave anybody good. I guess the best of the bunch is still Mattis, but I'm wary of him because of all the warmongering going on. And, I can't quite tell. I think he's smarter than everybody. So I think maybe he's smart enough to not, like, show his cards publicly, which the rest of them are not. So I don't necessarily know what he's privately thinking and, whether he's able to actually, trick Trump through different means.
Yeah, I did appreciate when they had that Dear Leader round table where they all went around and had to praise him, and Mike Pence basically just started worshiping him like he was some sort of golden calf. That was surprising even for him. But in that moment, Mattis, I did notice, diverted and praised the troops or whatever. So it seems like he was, he was smart enough to make it sound complimentary, but he didn't really go the full Pence route, as it were. So. Right.
Yeah, I think he's good. He has a better understanding of propaganda and language than I think a lot of people give him credit for. They think of him as, like, military guy. I think they think of him as a sort of strong and silent type. But for what I've seen of him, he's actually pretty savvy, and, like, that is the way. If you want to try to control Trump, you need to understand media, you need to understand rhetoric and language, and maybe there's some chance of it. But there's a part of me that just thinks anyone who's willing to sign up and work with this administration, especially at this point in time, is not a good person. Like, and at the same time, it bothers me because I want good people. Like, I want somebody to stop this. But when I see the resignations from good people, I absolutely understand why they're doing that, because you're put in a position where you're serving a fascist regime. You're certainly serving a racist and xenophobic regime that goes against constitutional values. So I don't know how you would wake up and live with yourself, but it's probably a very difficult decision for them, because then they also think, well, how do I live with not trying to fight it from the inside, or whatever they were trying to do. But, the long run of that is that I think, if they didn't quit, I think Trump would eventually purge them anyway. I think they know that. And so, what he wants is a staff of loyalists. And the longer he's in there, the more likely he is to get that. And the more of that he gets, the longer he's likely to stay. So it kind of feeds itself. It's, very bad.
Right, yeah. And I think one word we didn't define the first time we talked was caucusocracy. And I definitely think that's very applicable to the group we've got in there now. And there's a reason for that. I think you've kind of touched on that before, but it's like these people would not be anywhere near power unless they were next to Trump. I mean, there's no way Ben Carson would be a cabinet position member, except for the fact that Trump is president. So, like they owe their entire, their entire platform to the fact that they're near him, and it's like these are the absolute last people that you would want. It's like the fox guarding the hen house or whatever. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's weirdly similar to how The Apprentice worked, to how Celebrity Apprentice worked, where Trump picks D-listers kind of out of nowhere, like people who really shouldn't be on TV and have no qualifications for the job they're doing, and makes them do jobs and then fires them every now and again. Like it's like he's living this on some national level. But yeah, initially I didn't really use that word, caciocracy. People sometimes think that I coined it, or not coined it because it's a real word, but that I'm the one who brought it into play. I said kleptocracy just like a more specific reason, just because I felt like it's a subjective term. But yeah, the way you pointed out that these people would not be in there, if it weren't for Trump. And then, of course, some of them were hired, I think, to dismantle the departments that they were theoretically supposed to lead, is another indicator that, I think it's a more objective term. There really isn't anyone good in there except possibly, Mattis, who at least has proven he is qualified for the position he's in. Everyone else, no. And, I got to say, like, when I look at, 2020, not like I'm really thinking about that much with the presidential election, because I think too much is going to happen in between then and now. But, I'm keeping track of people's voting records and seeing who confirmed all these assholes and who didn't, and then keeping that in mind as I kind of watch people's political progress,
Yeah, and it's very frustrating to see the Democrats cave on certain things like that. Like, I remember, didn't Elizabeth Warren vote for Betsy DeVos, as I remember? Didn't she cave on that? And
I think so. She caved on somebody. I'm not sure if that's who it was.
I mean, you see this happen again and again, and it's like they're not gonna, they're bringing a knife to a gunfight, and they think they're gonna teach the Republicans about civility, and they just don't care. They're, like you said, they're acting as if there's no consequences, and if they keep this up, there may not be, because there's not going to be anyone to hold them accountable. But I think the Democrats need to start. They're the only force that can stop this, and they need to stop acting like this is politics as usual. And in 2018, do you think the main thing needs to be impeachment? Do you think that's just what they need to run on, or do you think that's a losing issue?
They can run on a lot of things. Sure. I mean, it's always weird to me, like, when, I'm not saying you do this, but sometimes I see this whole, like, should the Democrats bring up Russia, or should they bring up healthcare? I'm like, you bring up both.
Sure.
And honestly, they're connected in a lot of ways, because a lot of this is about corruption, and it's about, the taking of wealth by a small group of extremely corrupt people, away from taxpayers who are, entitled to that, who are entitled to have, basic social services provided for them by the government, because that's why they're being taxed. So, I think it's good to address everything. I'm always a fan of any kind of campaign, that focuses on, local and state needs and is driven by people from inside rather than from kind of a grand national level. I think that works better. You got to play to different audiences. I also just think it's so hard to tell what kind of world we're going to be living in by then, like whether we're in World War III, whether, nuclear war has happened or devices have been used, what's going to be happening, in terms of technology. Like, it changes so quickly. It's just so hard to say, but I think the Democrats should at least make a strong moral case. I think they should emphasize, the most vulnerable, the most, the people who've suffered most under this, make sure that they're there for them. Don't be shy about just saying that something is wrong, something is cruel, and that people deserve more, that it's not crazy to ask for $15 an hour wage, and it's not crazy to ask for, you to not be shot on the street because you're black. Like, that's not identity politics. That's right. All these things are rights that we are, constitutionally granted. And there's all this, like, hemming and hawing about, we can't be too extreme on the economy, or we can't talk about, the label of identity politics. It's like, no, just, be compassionate. Don't be an asshole. I mean, like, that's my advice for them. Like, if you're a decent person and you're sincere about wanting to solve this, I think people will pick up on that, and just speak plainly. And if they're going to criticize Trump, just freaking lay it on the line. It's not a normal administration. Like, there's no sense in pretending that it is. This is not, like Mitt Romney you're running against. So I think they just need to be really blunt, because people know when they're getting fed bullshit, and they know when things are really screwed up and weird. So if you start acting like everything's normal, then they don't trust you, because they're like, well, you don't get it. You're acting like everything's kind of cool, and we're just doing a regular old Democratic run. That's not going to work. So I just think they just need to be honest and compassionate, and hopefully we won't be in too much of a disaster that we can't figure a way out of it by then.
For sure. And I think he's basically giving them everything they need to run on, just handing it to them, and they just need to use it. I mean, if you want to look no further than the budget that he revealed today, with this ridiculous Blue Apron style service that is going to supposedly replace food stamps and give you like half what you get now, and you don't get any fresh fruits and vegetables, and canceling student loan forgiveness. It's like, Trump is supposed to be this populist and man of the people, and the American carnage and the forgotten man, and it's like, when are people gonna, in his base, maybe they never will, but it's like, made me think of that, Johnny Rotten quote, you ever get the feeling you've been cheated, like, when are you gonna realize you've, been conned, people, like, wake up, and Democrats just need to run on that kind of stuff, because I think people do want, it's not free stuff, you pay into this. I mean, don't call it entitlements, it's earned benefits, you know what I mean? Like I get Social Security taken out of my check, that's not an entitlement, right. I'm not entitled to that, I paid for it, give it to me, you know what I mean?
Right. And I also think, sometimes it's harder for older people, but I think younger people, by which I mean basically anyone under like 45 or so, like have spent most of their adult lives in a declining economy or an incredibly screwed up economy. If you're like 30 or younger, like you've never seen anything other than stagnating and falling wages. You've never been in a position where having a steady job and buying a house isn't some kind of fantasy. And so I think younger people are more willing to accept that if they need government help, or that if somebody is poor and struggling, that it's not their fault, that they have tried to do things right. They went to school, they work hard, they're sometimes working 2 jobs and they still can't pay their bills. I think older people have a harder time grasping that because they grew up in a different era where there was, more opportunities, it was easier to get by. But then, when it happens to them, when it happens to their kids, they go 2 ways. They either become more empathetic, towards others who are in the same plight, or it starts to, divide, usually along racial lines. We've seen this throughout history. Like that kind of economic condition is often a precursor to fascism. And I've certainly seen it, in Missouri, like when there's been the fast food strikes, which are mostly, black workers. Right. And I've talked to white workers who are just like, how dare they demand $15 an hour? I work as like a security guard and I make $12 or something like that. And I'm like, well, what if everyone was making more? Like, would that be better? And they're like, yeah, that would be better, but that's not what they want. They want, special thing. And it becomes this mentality because people don't talk to each other. They don't know, what life is actually like. It's a shared thing. And I think it's hard to get through that impasse. But, I worry that that's something Trump's going to exploit. Like if he does pass this budget, if people are, receiving horrible packages of prepackaged, inedible food and, their kids are hungry, that they may not lash out at Trump, who they should lash out at. They may lash out at who are the most vulnerable people in their community, which is usually immigrants and non-white people. That's something that I've worried about that for a while, and hopefully it already has come to pass to some degree, but I hope it doesn't accelerate. Oh yeah, absolutely. And if you ever look at the comments section, which you shouldn't do, but in like articles and stuff, if you see somebody like cheating on like food stamps or selling food stamps, just the most vitriolic comments, and it's like, these are not the people keeping you down. I promise you. Like, this is not why you don't have the things that you want in your life. This is somebody who's just maybe a little less well off than you, trying to survive, and it's like, this is not the person keeping you down, but it's like just pit people against each other and they'll never look up and realize what's happening above them. So but no, it's very frustrating. It's very sad to see. And the other thing is like, this has been going on a long time. Like we're now almost on the 10th anniversary of the crash, and I know that things haven't recovered here in Missouri, and it's been 10 years. And so to a lot of people, including including me, I kind of look to the future and don't see one. Like, I can't picture anymore what like normal is supposed to be. I mean, for a variety of reasons, not just the economy, but because of Trump and all these other things. But I think when you lose that sense of the future, in certain people, it can instill panic. And, as Star Wars says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, it leads to the dark side. But honestly, I mean, it's true. It's a very accurate progression of how things go. And that kind of fear is very strong right now. And so, I do worry about how that's going to play out.
See, I knew we'd get to depressing.
I'm reliable in that sense, yeah.
For sure. Well, hey, I mean, the Olympics are going on, and I couldn't let this occasion pass without noting the supreme irony of Mike Pence not standing for the combined Korean national anthem when, I'm here in Indianapolis, outside Indianapolis right now, and he flew specifically here to throw a hissy fit at the Colts game. So I just couldn't let that pass without noting that. So I guess anthem protests are okay if you're the vice president. So
yeah, I guess so. I mean, all that stuff. I just sort of tuned the Olympics out. I'm like not so much a sports person, but I'm also just like, oh God, the politics of this. Like, I need a break. I need to just watch crap on Netflix or something.
Yeah, right.
Not watch anything that's happening in real time anymore. So.
Well, exactly. And we talked about the Nazi Next Door profile, and not that these are the same groups, but I have seen people seemingly fall for this charm offensive by the North Korean government, and
right.
It's like okay, well, Kim Jong-un's sister's charming or whatever, but this is still like a nightmare George Orwell state, and let's not forget that. I don't think we should start a nuclear war over it, but let's not pretend that they're some charming neighbor that we just discovered or something right away. So
it's maddening. Like, I remember after Trump was elected, and these people were asking me for like advice about journalism, and I said, one thing you should do is like get journalists who work in authoritarian states and semi-authoritarian states, especially those who have been citizens or are citizens, to talk to journalists in the United States to explain how this works, to explain how reporting works, and how to not be tricked by governments into becoming their inadvertent propaganda tool. And I was also thinking, because I do have friends from countries, like Azerbaijan, or my friends from Uzbekistan mostly had to leave Uzbekistan, but they often are struggling. Like, people romanticize dissent, but their struggle for work. And I was thinking, this could be really useful. Like, they could help train the American journalists on what to look out for. But that didn't happen. It was like another one of my ideas with bring back local journalism, that people were just kind of like, I'll just write about the Nazi instead. But I wish they had. I wish people had taken some guidance, because my friends who live in repressive countries have just seen these tricks all the time. Seen people fall for, honestly, like the Ivanka Trump types. It's very typical. Like, the dictator has a daughter, has some sort of beautiful woman in the family. They bring them out to sort of soften stuff up, and that's what's happening with North Korea. Yeah, of course, it's like, yeah, I don't want a war, but, get some perspective, for God's sakes. Like, is this in a good place?
Is there somewhere in between war and drooling adulation that we can get to? Just find somewhere in between there. That's what I want.
Yeah, exactly.
But, yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, I think you had a tweet or a thread that you retweeted about how, living in an authoritarian country, it's not all, people think that, you'd notice it day to day, but that's why they call it creeping authoritarianism. It creeps up on you. It's not, it's one thing and then it's the next. It's the frog in the boiling water or whatever. So it's like, you don't necessarily notice it. It's not all right away. And, you have to kind of note these things as they happen. That's kind of why I like, is it Amy Siskind that does that list every week?
The list.
Yeah, that's perfect. Like, I love that. Like, it's like, yeah, don't let this stuff pass by. It seems minor at the time. It seems petty. It seems like, oh, don't, every little thing, don't note it. But like, if you look back, like look at what we're talking about right now. This is this is 2 years ago. I don't even think I would imagine talking about these things right now.
No, and I'm sure if we played like all the interviews run back to back, there's like probably a steady progression into like really horrific stuff. By the way, I can't remember if I mentioned it on the show before, but Amy's lists are going to be a book called The List, and I wrote the introduction for it.
Oh, did you? That's cool. I didn't know that. Awesome.
Yeah, in late great march. It's coming out, so people should pick that up, because, oh my God, when you see them all together, I mean, it's hard. It's like, don't read it in one sitting, but it's really good to kind of bring yourself back to, like, you know, inauguration time and sort of think, well, what were our standards of normal life then, and like what was thought of as an outrageous event? Because unfortunately, so many things she documented have become, you know, a routine part of our lives, and it's like exactly what you described, you know, where the frogs in the water. I mean, we are right now, but when you see it written out, you can at least kind of bring yourself back to that point in time when you were shocked, you know. I mean, I think people are still outraged. You know, they wouldn't be out on the streets if they weren't outraged, but we're not shocked anymore, you know, and you lose a little bit of yourself in that way, you know.
Yeah.
And that's one of the hardest things to prevent from happening.
Yeah, and you know, I look forward to the time when, you know, if there is a time when Trump isn't president anymore, but I think people are under the illusion, and I guess I was under this illusion, at least in the beginning of it, that, you know, things will snap back into place, but, you know, there's certain things that are just, they're broken. They won't come back.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, this whole thing with Devin Nunes and the by the way, what is he doing anywhere near this investigation? That's another issue. But he's on the transition team, and he was supposed to be you know, recused or whatever, and now he's doing this. But you know, but they're never gonna, I mean, why would anyone give them, the House Intelligence Committee, you know, anything? You know, why would they give them any information at this point? They know they're gonna, you know, possibly turn it into a politicized memo or something, or some ridiculous leak or something, and it's like that's gone. Like, we're not going to get that back, and that's something that's broken. So, like, yes, we may be able to recover some things, but man, not everything.
Yeah, like, if we're able to get stuff back, it's going to take so long. You know, there's a part of me that thinks, okay, maybe when there's some retirements and people, you know, who have grudges are able to, I don't know. I mean, that's only if we manage to get Trump out, and, you know, once an autocrat gets in, it's very hard to get them out, and I think we're more likely to have some kind of horrible, slicker replacement of him, you know, and I'm hoping that's not the direction that we go, but, you know, we need to be more forceful in it. But yeah, I mean, there are things that just aren't the same. It reminds me of, you know, how I felt after 9/11, you know, where I kind of looked back at that pre-9/11 period and everything. You know, and I lived in New York when that happened, so it was like very direct for me, you know, and I was walking around seeing all the missing persons posters and, you know, seeing the smoke, and you know, it's obviously upsetting for everyone, but, you know, when you're there, it's like, oh my God. And, you know, and I kept thinking, like, everything will feel different from now on. You know, the sense of threat will never go away, and it, you know, and it kind of did go away, or at least it was replaced by other concerns. But, you know, I missed that time before, and I felt that way after the economic crash, and I felt that way after Trump. Like, there's just these events where, you know, your country it just changes, and it'll never go back. And, like, the best you could hope for is that it just turns into something better. It's going to be something different, but, you know, maybe it could actually be good. It just will never be what's before. And so, you know, you sort of have to mourn it a little bit. You know I do. I try to not think about it too much because it gets me too sad, but it's inevitable. So,
Dios mío, how's my liver going to survive this?
Right.
Well, have been to any good caves lately?
What?
Been to any good caves lately?
Oh no, but I've got a plan. So yeah, I'm psyched. I think in March, you know, in honor of Roy Moore not being elected, we're going to Alabama for a little mini vacation, and there's a cave there that I want to go to. So we're going to go, cool. But you know, I've never been, so we're going to go to Selma and Montgomery and maybe down to the beach. You know, my kids are off from school, and I can kind of drive from St. Louis and, you know, see how Alabama is. So I'm going to go be an Alabama tourist. That's my plan.
Awesome. Well, I mean, whatever happens, you know, like you said before, you know, the important part is you just have to keep going, and it doesn't matter really what the outcome is. You know, we're both parents. Yeah. We have kids. We can't give up. It's not really an option. Yeah. It's not really like I want to give up all the time and curl into a ball, but it just doesn't work like that. So
no, absolutely. I've had a lot of those days, like this last month. My God. But yeah, I mean, there's not, you know, there's not much you can do, but you just got to kind of get up and roll with it. And, you know, the thing is like I've known people who've been through much worse. You know, I know people who've lived in real authoritarian regimes, you know, who've been jailed, who've endured all these hardships. And, you know, there's there's nothing fun about it. There's nothing romantic about it, but they were able to survive it, and it did have meaning and purpose for other people. They were able to help other people. So, I just hope, we're able to do that, and at the least, just be good role models for our kids. For younger people to not, give in, not just kind of roll over like a Republican or something, but actually, stand up for yourself, stand up for your country.
Sure. And
that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can at least be proud that, when, if there is a future, of course, but if in the future we look back, you can at least be proud of what you did when it came down to it, and you definitely can't say that for everyone, so.
Yeah, no, that's true, and, you can sleep with a clear conscience. I mean, that's all you can kind of strive for these days. I mean, I always think, there's got to be more that I could be doing, but then I'm like, I'm so freaking tired. I don't know what else it is. But,
and I'm potty training my 3-year-old, and I'm not getting.
Oh my God, that's like hell. That is literally the worst part of being a parent. Like everyone says newborn, but it's not. It's age 3 potty training, and my kids extended to age 4. Or they're gonna kill me that I freaking said this.
Okay, maybe our kids won't be so proud of us after they hear this part of the podcast.
Oh man, that was hard. So yeah, if you're fighting a dictator and you're potty training a 2-year-old, then my heart goes out to you.
Exactly. It's like Trump's ruining America, and you just did that on the floor. Why?
Oh yeah, no, I got it easy. I mean, mine are both. They're in elementary school. They're older. All that's in the distant past, thank God. But yeah, no, that's a tough age. There's no terrible 2s. There's just terrible 3s.
That's right. That's what I've been saying. All right.
Oh yeah, they're deranged. And actually, Trump gives you some practice. It's like mentality similarity, same kind of logic.
Don't insult my children. They're way better than.
Yeah. Sorry.
Even my 8-month-old. But anyway. Hey, I appreciate you coming back on. I like what you do, of course, and everybody listening, I'm sure, does too. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoy this podcast, there are several ways to support it. Join the Rob Burgess Show mailing list. Go to tinyletter.com/The Rob Burgess Show and type in your email address. Then respond to the automatic message. I have a Patreon account which can be found at patreon.com/Rob Burgess Show Patreon. I hope you'll consider supporting in any amount. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review everywhere the podcast is available, including iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Facebook, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, and RSS. The official website for the podcast is www.therobburgessshow.com. You can find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com. And if you have something to say, record a voice memo on your smartphone and send it to therobburgessshow@gmail.com. Include voice memo in the subject line of the email. Until next time.